Today we have with us Mr. Ratul Puri, Chairman, Hindustan Powerprojects Private Limited, one of the leading players in the Indian energy sector today. Sir, tell us about the current mix of your portfolio in terms of renewables versus thermal, and where do you want to take it going forward?
Sure. So today we've got a little less than 2 gigawatts of capacity we've built out, and out of which 1.2 gigawatts is coal thermal, and the balance is solar, out of which about half of it is in India and half of it is outside of India.
But where do you want to take it going forward?
So I think, our focus in the next 3 to 5 years is to build out the balance part of our coal thermal capacity, where the first focus will be on the expansion in Madhya Pradesh, where the plant is a 2.5 gigawatt plant. It's a 2,500 megawatt plant. We built out 1,200 megawatts of it. We want to build out the balance 1,300 megawatts. And post that, we would take up the Chhattisgarh asset, which is 1,300 megawatts. And along with that, I think a very significant focus, once again on solar. We had stepped back from the solar market over the last 9 months because tariffs had come down very, very aggressively. We think these tariffs will correct, in the near term, and then we'll continue to build out our solar portfolio.
But you see the tariffs correcting going ahead?
I think either tariffs have to correct or costs have to come down. One of the two has to happen.
Yeah.
I don't see any immediate triggers for further reductions in cost. Which means tariffs have to correct themselves. Okay. And I think it's a 10% type movement in tariffs I think is reasonable on the solar side. I think it overcorrected. I think we saw that happen on the coal thermal side also. We saw tariffs in the 2011 till 12, 13, maybe 2010 till 13 period as being been driven down too low, and we saw those tariffs going back into rational levels.
But the minister is quite gung-ho about the whole solar tariffs falling. Do you think there could be much of a difference from the current levels?
So I said about a 10% movement. So you're seeing tariffs today are in the 4.5 to 5. I think a rational tariff range would be 5 to 5.5. And they've come off very sharply, and I think it's been very much driven by, I think, Ministry of New and Renewable Energy listening to investors, developers, and packaging and putting together assets with where there's a more equitable distribution of risk. So when you come in with a packaged asset with an off-taker as NTPC, you are reducing the risk in the asset, and therefore investors are willing to live with lower returns. But I think they've gone too low. I think they will correct upwards.
So the 10% correction is a comfortable position?
Yeah, I think at 10% I think it's reasonable.
Okay. And then what kind of investments do you plan to do in the next 5 years?
So I think with roughly around 2 gigawatts or so of renewable and the 1.3 gigawatts of coal thermal, I think the investment levels would be somewhere in the range of around 20,000 crores.
And the renewable would be mostly solar, or you want
mostly solar? Mostly solar.
Anything about wind that you're thinking about?
I think wind in certain states today makes sense. Yeah. I think wind, the challenges I think of wind are relative to solar, is the fact that generation of wind is very concentrated in the monsoon period and at dawn and dusk, and hence it's contrary to the demand cycle. So the likelihood of wind driving greater degrees of instability in the grid relative to solar are far higher. And I think that's an added element of risk on the wind side.
Okay. So then you would be focusing mostly on solar.
For, greater emphasis on solar.
Yeah. Okay. And also, if we talk about renewable as a whole, a lot has been talked about grid instability. So your thoughts on that? How to go about it?
I think one of the biggest challenges that are going to exist over the next 5 years, if India does go forward and build out its 165 gigawatts of solar, is going to be of renewable, is going to be dealing with grid instability. I think it's a big challenge. That's a very significant portion at peak of our energy demand, and to counter that, I think we need to have create some level of storage, but storage is very, very expensive. Trying to time shift a couple of hours of solar can double the price of solar. And so, then the next best alternative is to try to utilize hydro to try to address the grid instability aspects. Even with having, if we do build out significantly additional hydro capacity, I think we still will have challenges, and there will be a lot of strengthening of the grid that needs to be done to address the significant amounts of renewables that are going to come on stream.
But then the companies like you and other companies, they're investing heavily on renewables, but then also the grid instability issue remains. So isn't there, things are not on the table?
No, I think, one, I think as, the government very correctly so has moved their focus towards hydro.
Yeah.
I think to some extent recognizing the fact that the hydro is a renewable, irrespective of how it's classified, it is really a renewable energy source, and it's reasonably priced, and hydro has the greatest ability at the lowest cost to time shift power. So with the ability to time shift power, it can play a very good balancing role for the solar and wind renewable capacity that we are trying to bring on stream. And so, it will be one of the tools I think the government will use to balance out the significant amounts of renewables coming on stream. Beyond that, the grid needs to be strengthened, and I think the government is doing that. So, if you have demand in South India, but you have solar generation in Rajasthan, if you don't have any way of evacuating that power, you will create instability in the northern grid, or you'll create instability in Rajasthan. But if you significantly strengthen transmission, then you get you end up with a pan-India potential market, and that can reduce the level of instability.
Okay, but
so it is a concern area. Grid instability is a concern area, but it is not unmanageable.
Okay, and you would be investing in hydro as well.
That's correct.
Okay.
So we are waiting for the new policy announcements from the government. We have 2 hydro assets that are ready to build, and we will take those into construction, post the announcements on the policy side from the government.
How big are the
hydro assets? We have 2 hydro assets totaling about 550 odd megawatts.
Okay. And you would like to expand them going ahead?
We'd like to build these assets out.
Okay.
And then, we have a fair amount on our plate. We've got a fair amount from an investment horizon. And then, a couple of years down the road, we look at taking on incremental hydro assets. I think a large portion of renewing hydro investments in the country is going to be driven by the nature and shape of the policy that gets announced, because the government is looking at announcing a revised hydro policy.
Okay, now that you're looking on hydro, many a times industry people have said that hydro is an issue in this country because of infrastructural issues. Would you, do you think you could also face something like that, or have you already faced such issues?
I think, especially run-of-the-river hydro projects are typically, built out in mountainous regions, and a lot of the incremental hydro potential of this country is in the northeast, and there certainly are infrastructural issues, access to sites, ability to bring construction material and equipment in, and most importantly, the ability to evacuate power. So, it is certainly an area of concern. And so there's a lot more significant level of investment that needs to be done by the developer in building out the requisite enabling infrastructure to actually go out and build the asset. If you're building a coal thermal plant, you expect there's already going to be a road leading in there, there's going to be an airport close by, there's going to be rail linkages that will come in close by, so you can move goods and people easily to your site. But in hydro, I don't think that's a given. In some of the sites it's a given, but in a majority of the sites, the developer will have to build out the infrastructure needed for building out the hydro asset. So if you look at our assets, they're in Lahaul Spiti. So a big enabler is the Rohtang tunnel. So as soon as the Rohtang tunnel gets built, you have 365, almost 365 day a year access to the site. Without the Rohtang tunnel, when the Rohtang Pass shuts down, you don't have access to the site.
Okay. Now also coal production has increased a lot in the country, and things have improved, say, compared to the last 5 years. So your plans in thermal?
So, to start with, we want to build out, the expansion of the Anuppur plant. So that's the first goal we have got. A lot of the infrastructure works and common facilities have already been built out with the first phase. So our capital cost of building out the second phase will be significantly lower than the first phase. Okay. And so that obviously makes the most sense for us immediately to build out. I think it's very crucial for India to once again restart the investment cycle on coal thermal, because there's a limited amount of coal thermal capacity that's under construction, and over the last couple of years, since 2013 onwards, at least on the IPP side, there's been virtually no new asset that's been taken into development. So it's been 3 years with no asset taken into development, I don't see any IPPs rushing out to take greenfield assets into development on the coal thermal side. So I think India will face a challenge post 2018, 2019, where there'll be a period of many years where there'll be very little incremental coal thermal capacity getting added. And fundamentally, I believe in the near to medium term and possibly in the long term, coal thermal is going to remain the mainstay of India's power generation. Even if we add 165 gigawatts of renewable, at the plant load factors renewable operates at, that's equivalent to 25-30 gigawatts of coal thermal. So, in energy terms, it's very low because renewable assets operate infrequently. So it's very crucial, I think, for India to build out incremental coal thermal capacity. So I think, as you look at it from the government's perspective, you look at it from the, the minister's perspective, he came in, addressed many of the issues of coal thermal, then put a focus on renewable. I think he's done a good job on the renewable side. Now he's addressing hydro, and I think then he'll come back in the cycle and say, now how do I restart the investment cycle on coal thermal?
Okay. You're on the field, you know what's happening in renewables, what kind of demand is there, what kind of capacities are being built. Do you think India is on track to meet the target of 175 gigawatt by 2022?
So I think it's a very ambitious program. I think the government has shown, both a willingness and, more importantly, execution to go out and actually, move along the trajectory that puts us to 175 gigawatts. So, if you look at the sheer volume of projects bid out, in the last 12 months, and if you look at what's planned to be bid out in the next 12 months, I think the government is doing its piece in trying to create an enabler. I think the risk to this is over exuberance in bidding. And, we've seen many challenges historically. If you look at, we went through a similar cycle in coal thermal, over exuberance by IPPs to come in, trying to build out assets, bidding too low, not all the risks that they anticipated playing out the way they thought it would play out. Then you end up with stranded assets and all sorts of challenges. So I think the big risk is if tariffs are too low, these are unviable projects, right? And if the project is unviable, it'll either not get built out, or if it gets built out, it'll create distress for an equity investor or a lender. And if that happens, that's not good for the sector, because then equity investors and lenders will run away like they ran away from coal thermal.
But whenever we have spoken to the minister, we have always shared this concern that the tariffs have fallen and the projects might go unviable. He has always said that the companies are comfortable in bidding.
So I think his position is not wrong. He has created an enabling environment. Developers went to him and said, we want to reduce discom risk. We have challenges with land acquisition. We have challenges with transmission. Please create an enabling environment. He went out and created an enabling environment. He put SECI and NTPC in the middle, so reduced discom risk significantly. He created solar parks. He said, we'll build the infrastructure. As the government, we'll build the park. We'll build the infrastructure. We'll give you a good counterparty. Now, so he's done his piece of it. I think if developers have come in and bid too low, what do you expect him to do? Right? He's created an enabling environment. He said there is bidding. He can't go out and tell developers, no, please bid higher. Right? Then, I think you as the press will come in and say that he's, there's a scam in this. Right?
No, why I asked, because as a company, if you know that this could be unviable, then why are you bidding at the first place?
I think there are assumptions in those spreadsheets. And I think there are optimistic assumptions in some of those spreadsheets. And it happens, it's natural. If you look at any sector, whether you look at roads, transmission lines, coal thermal, when you look at it, there's always a period of exuberance. I think investors are coming in and saying, a lot of new players are coming in and saying, we want to get into the sector, let's start. There's a massive investment opportunity. This is clearly a sunrise sector. There's massive opportunity here. So maybe we live with slightly lower returns today, but we need to gain the expertise, we need to gain the capability, we need to build the team. I think part of it is there, and to some extent I think there are certain assumptions and bets that are being taken, and maybe they play out, and I think overall it will be good if they play out, but equally they may not play out. They didn't play out perfectly on the coal thermal side. They didn't play out perfectly on the hydro side. I think the reality is that things always do go wrong. Nothing goes perfectly to plan.
Correct. So while we are talking about adding more capacities and building new plants, demand has fallen. So as a company, have you faced challenges in selling electricity to DISCOMs, keeping also in mind that their financial health is also not good?
So I think the biggest risk to this sector, and I've been consistent in this position of mine, is the financial health of distribution companies. And I don't think demand has fallen. I think growth has been much lower than anticipated, and I think part of that reason is because DISCOMs are not buying, because the more they buy and the more they sell, the more they lose. And so you have a dysfunctional market. You have generators on one end who have idle capacity. You have consumers on the other end who want power. You have consumers on one end who are burning diesel power at 15-20 rupees a unit, and you have an intermediary that's dysfunctional, which is not connecting the consumer with the generator, which is what the DISCOM is meant to do. I think the UDAY program is probably one of the best programs I have seen rolled out by the government across any sector. It's extremely well thought through. It's a participative program. Multiple stakeholders have been brought together: public sector banks, the government, DISCOMs, states, and it's tried to address and try to deal with this dysfunctional part of the value chain. I think a big part of the success of this sector and the government's ability to deliver on its promises in the sector is going to be dependent upon the success of UDAY. And so if UDAY is successful and delivers upon its promise, I think demand is not going to be an issue. I think there's enough latent demand coupled with the fact that we've got 80 gigawatts, that's 40% of India's peak demand, that's sitting there in liquid fuel fired generation capacity, diesel, furnace oil, LSHS, which should not be there. It should not be there in a coal-rich country. It's irrational. So I think that that capacity will take will hopefully go away if UDAY is successful, because the DISCOM will now start meeting demand of its customers.
But you as a company, have you faced problems in selling power to DISCOMs?
I think we have mostly tied up our sale of power. So we are not in the market today to sell. Having said that, DISCOMs are not buying power. That's reflected in the tariffs in the day-ahead markets. It's reflected in the short-term tariffs. It's not reflected in the long-term tariffs, because I think developers, especially on the coal thermal side, are looking at, no one wants to sign up to an irrational 25-year tariff. You don't mind saying, I'll sell tomorrow at a cheap price, okay, for 1 day, 1 week, 1 month, 1 year, but I can't tie myself in to sell at irrational price for 25 years. So I think long-term tariffs are still rational, but the short and medium-term tariffs reflect the fact that there is idling capacity, and you have demand that's unmet and idling capacity in the middle. But that's a short-term phenomena. That has to correct itself as soon as demand picks up in the market. That phenomena will correct itself. So I think I believe short-term to medium-term tariffs will also start being more cost-reflective than they are today.
Hindustan Powerprojects is also into mining.
So we had a coal mine, which we had in joint venture with Chhattisgarh Mineral Development Corporation. We lost the mine as part of the Supreme Court cancellation. So we still have a mining team. So we would look at potential future bids that the government may bring of coal mines, and I think it's important for these to come in. It's important for mines to get back into the hands of either independent mining operators or potential end consumers of that coal. And so that's an area we continue to look at. We have to again see rationality. If we see bidding which is negative, so if somebody says I will pay to extract coal, I will pay you money, that's not rational. And that certainly we will not participate in that.
But that's what has happened in
that's
the
what has happened,
round
right?
of auctions.
So but I think again, there's a scarcity at that point in time. I understand why some people did that. There was scarcity. There was a need for coal. They had power plants that were based upon this coal that had been built out. You had hundreds of thousands of crores of assets that had been built out. They needed the coal, so there was that scarcity value. But the reality is India has enough coal. There's no shortage of coal in this country. We just need to excavate and evacuate that coal, which are the two challenges around it. And again, I believe coal thermal power is the power that makes the most sense for India in the medium term. Long term, it's very difficult to assess.
And finally, sir, your plans about listing on the stock exchanges?
I think we've got our entire current portfolio. The portfolio we had taken up for execution 5 years ago is built out. It's generating very good free cash flow for us. So we have no immediate need to raise capital for our near-term expansion plans. Having said that, Blackstone is a large investor. Blackstone invested $300 million in 2010. We have to provide Blackstone with an exit at some point in time, which rationally will only come through a listing of Hindustan Power. So it's something we will look at in the future, but we have no immediate cash requirements based upon our current investment horizon to need to list.
But are you looking at any timeline or nothing?
No, I think no immediate timeline.
Okay, great, sir. Thank you so much for talking.
Thank you very much.
That was Mr. Ratul Puri, Chairman, Hindustan Power Projects Private Limited, talking to us about the company's plans going ahead and the sector as a whole. Stay tuned for more interviews. We'll be back soon. Thank you.